Inside the human body, one of the most astonishing biological journeys ever begins with something almost invisible: a single cell. From that one microscopic starting point, trillions of cells will eventually form a complete human being. A heart that beats, a brain that thinks, tiny fingers that can grasp, and lungs that will one day take their very first breath. This process is called pregnancy, and it is one of the most complex and beautifully coordinated events in biology. But how does it actually happen? How does a single fertilized egg transform into a fully developed baby in just 9 months? What happens inside the body during those early days when life is just beginning? And how does the mother's body support and protect a growing human the entire time? In this video, you will explore the entire journey of pregnancy, from the moment an egg is released to fertilization, early embryonic development, and the incredible transformation that happens before birth. Along the way, you'll discover fascinating details about human development that most people never hear about. So let's start at the very beginning, with the organs that make reproduction possible. Chapter 1. The female reproductive system. Both men and women have reproductive organs designed specifically for one purpose: creating new life. In the female body, two small organs called ovaries play a crucial role. Each ovary contains hundreds of thousands of microscopic egg cells. In fact, at birth, a female already has around 1 to 2 million immature eggs stored inside her ovaries. By puberty, that number drops to about 400,000 to 500,000. These eggs are stored in tiny sacs called follicles. Each month during the menstrual cycle, several follicles begin to mature, but usually only one becomes dominant. This dominant follicle grows larger and larger until it eventually releases an egg. This event is known as ovulation, and it marks the moment when fertilization becomes possible. Chapter 2. The release of the egg. When ovulation occurs, the mature egg leaves the ovary. But the egg doesn't simply fall into empty space. Nearby is a delicate structure called the fallopian tube. At the end of this tube are finger-like extensions called fimbriae. These structures gently sweep over the surface of the ovary, guiding the released egg into the fallopian tube. Inside the tube, tiny hair-like structures called cilia help move the egg forward. Muscle contractions in the tube also assist with this movement. The egg now begins its slow journey toward the uterus, but it won't travel very far before something remarkable happens. Because from the opposite direction, another microscopic traveler may already be on its way. Chapter 3. The structure of the egg. Before we follow the sperm, let's take a closer look at the egg itself. The egg cell is the largest cell in the human body, and it's surrounded by protective layers. The outermost layer is called the corona radiata. Beneath it lies another protective shell known as the zona pellucida. These layers act like security barriers. Any sperm that wants to fertilize the egg must first break through both of them. Inside the egg is the cell nucleus, which contains 23 chromosomes. Chromosomes are tightly packed bundles of DNA. And DNA is essentially the instruction manual for building a human body. Your hair color, eye color, height potential, and countless other traits are encoded within DNA. But right now, the egg contains only half the genetic information needed to create a new human. The other half must come from the father. And that brings us to one of the most intense microscopic races in nature. Chapter 4. The journey of the sperm. During ejaculation, the male body releases millions of sperm cells. Each sperm is incredibly small, far smaller than the egg, but each one carries its own package of genetic information. The mission is simple: reach the egg. But achieving that goal is incredibly difficult. After entering the female reproductive system, sperm must swim through the cervix, into the uterus, and then toward the fallopian tubes. Out of millions of sperm, only a few hundred will even reach the egg. And only one single sperm will ultimately succeed. Interestingly, the egg releases chemical signals that help guide sperm toward it, almost like a microscopic navigation system. This increases the chances that sperm will find their target. When a sperm finally reaches the egg, it must still overcome the protective layers surrounding it. Chapter 5. Fertilization. The head of the sperm contains a structure called the acrosome. This acts like a tiny biochemical drill. It releases enzymes that allow the sperm to break through the egg's outer layers. Once a sperm successfully penetrates the corona radiata and the zona pellucida, it enters the egg. At that moment, something incredible happens. Yet the egg instantly changes its outer structure to prevent any other sperm from entering. This prevents multiple sperm from fertilizing the egg, a situation that would make development impossible. Now, fertilization is complete. The genetic material from the mother and father combine, and a brand new cell is formed. This cell is called a zygote. It is the very first cell of a new human life. Chapter 6. The first cell. Divisions. The zygote doesn't stay a single cell for long. Almost immediately, it begins dividing. One cell becomes two. Two become four. Four become 8. Then 16. Then 32. This process is known as cleavage. Interestingly, while the number of cells increases, the overall size of the embryo does not grow yet. Instead, each cell becomes smaller and smaller. At around the 16 to 32 cell stage, the embryo resembles a tiny berry. Because of this appearance, scientists call it a morula, which means mulberry in Latin. Eventually, the morula continues developing into a structure called a blastocyst. Chapter 7. The blastocyst. The blastocyst is a hollow structure filled with fluid. Inside it are two important groups of cells. The embryoblast will eventually develop into the embryo itself, the future baby. The trophoblast will form structures that support the embryo, including the placenta and membranes. At this stage, the embryo is still traveling through the fallopian tube toward the uterus. Once it arrives there, the next critical step begins. Implantation. Chapter 8. Implantation. The uterus is lined with a special tissue called the endometrium. Every month, this lining thickens in preparation for possible pregnancy. When the blastocyst arrives, it must first escape from its protective shell, the zona pellucida. This process is known as hatching. Once free, the blastocyst attaches itself to the uterine lining. Gradually, it begins embedding deeper into the tissue. This process is called implantation. It usually occurs about 1 week after fertilization. Sometimes, implantation may cause a small amount of spotting known as implantation bleeding. This is completely normal and harmless. Chapter 9. The early embryo. Once implantation occurs, the embryo begins to grow rapidly. Cells continue dividing, and new structures start forming. Two layers appear first, the epiblast, the hypoblast. These layers help organize the early embryo and will contribute to the formation of important structures. Soon, a fluid-filled space called the amniotic cavity develops. This cavity will eventually surround the embryo with amniotic fluid, which protects and cushions it throughout pregnancy. Another structure called the yolk sac forms as well. Even though humans don't rely on a yolk for nutrition like bird embryos do, the yolk sac still plays an important role in early development. Chapter 10. Gastrulation. The body plan. Forms. Around the 3rd week of development, one of the most important events occurs, a process called gastrulation. During gastrulation, 3 primary layers of cells are formed. These are called germ layers. Each germ layer will eventually give rise to specific tissues and organs. The ectoderm forms the nervous system, brain, skin, and eyes. The mesoderm forms muscles, bones, the circulatory system, and connective tissues. The endoderm forms internal organs like the lungs, liver, and digestive tract. From these 3 layers, the entire human body will develop. Chapter 11. Building the nervous system. Soon after gastrulation, another critical process begins. This process is called neurulation. During neurulation, the early nervous system starts forming. A groove appears along the developing embryo. This groove eventually folds inward and closes to form the neural tube. The neural tube will later develop into the brain and spinal cord. Small segments called somites appear along the sides of the embryo. These somites will later contribute to the development of muscles, bones, and parts of the skin. By the fourth week of development, the basic foundation of the nervous system is already in place. Chapter 12. The First Heartbeat. Around this same time, another incredible milestone occurs. The heart begins to beat. At first, the heart is just a simple tube, but it quickly begins pumping blood through the tiny blood vessels of the developing embryo. Even at this early stage, the circulatory system is already functioning. This tiny heartbeat is one of the earliest signs of life inside the developing embryo. Chapter 13. Rapid Growth. As the weeks pass, the embryo grows rapidly. By the fourth week, small protrusions appear that will eventually become arms and legs. The head becomes more defined. Structures that will form the eyes, ears, and nose begin to develop. The embryo curves into a C-shaped structure, and the tail-like extension gradually disappears as development continues. By the eighth week, the embryo measures about 2 to 3 centimeters long. At this point, the embryo begins to look distinctly human. And from this moment on, it is called a fetus. Chapter 14. The Fetal Stage. During the fetal stage, the focus shifts from forming structures to growing and refining them. The eyelids develop and remain closed for several weeks. The skeleton begins to harden through a process called ossification, where cartilage gradually turns into bone. Fine hair called lanugo covers the body. This hair helps keep a protective substance called vernix caseosa attached to the skin. Vernix protects the delicate skin from the constant exposure to amniotic fluid. Chapter 15. Movement and Growth. By around 18 weeks, many mothers begin to feel the baby move. These movements are called quickening. Inside the womb, the fetus can stretch, turn, kick, and even practice breathing movements. The sucking reflex also develops, allowing the fetus to practice movements that will later be essential for feeding. The brain continues developing rapidly. Billions of neurons are forming connections that will eventually allow the baby to think, learn, and interact with the world. Chapter 16. The Placenta. Throughout pregnancy, the fetus relies on a remarkable organ called the placenta. The placenta acts as a bridge between mother and baby. It allows oxygen and nutrients to pass from the mother's blood into the fetal bloodstream. At the same time, waste products from the fetus, such as carbon dioxide and urea, are transferred back to the mother's circulation for removal. Interestingly, the blood of the mother and fetus never actually mix directly. Instead, substances pass across a thin barrier within structures called chorionic villi. These tiny projections greatly increase the surface area for exchange. Chapter 17. The Final Months. In the final months of pregnancy, the fetus grows rapidly. Body fat increases. The lungs mature. The brain continues developing complex connections. Lanugo hair gradually disappears, and the baby becomes stronger and more active. Space inside the uterus becomes tighter as the baby grows. Chapter 18. Ready for birth. After about 38 weeks, development is usually complete. A full-term baby typically measures around 50 centimeters long and weighs about 3 kilograms. At this point, the baby is ready for life outside the womb. Soon, labor will begin, marking the end of pregnancy and the start of a new chapter. The journey from a single cell to a newborn human is complete. And it all happened inside the incredible environment of the human body.